wanted to tell you that the LEDS-LAC platform, which I represent from the Secretariat, has turned 10 years this year. This LEDS-LAC platform was created as an open peer learning and cooperation platform in order to strengthen um, the Latin American and Caribbean countries towards a resilient development. And in these 10 years, we've seen how these countries from the region have been maturing in terms of the climate, and we have been witnessing the different changes that we've seen based on the Paris Agreement and the efforts that each country is doing in order to achieve the SDGs, the long-term strategies, adaptation techniques, and all of these that accompanies these processes. And the energy sector evidently has been one of the prioritized sectors in all of these efforts that the countries have done. They have been focusing on developing ambitious plans, commitments, and initiatives for a clean energy promotion. And in this framework, this can be a key component in order to achieve the national strategies of decarbonization, and they also contribute with other important benefits for the development, social, economical benefits, reliability in energy supply, more energy in other areas, and to reduce the amount of waste, among other benefits that we may find. In order to promote collaboration and learning, I mentioned that this was one of the goals of the LEDS-LAC platform. We create these spaces for exchanges, regional and sectorial or general events. We promote the creation of practice communities and different activities that depending on the needs that we identify in our membership. The Bioenergy Community of Practice, led by Lorenzo, was the first community that we created in this platform in the year 20. Government representatives, NGOs, representatives from the private sector, and among all of them, they try to promote bioenergy in this region, designing projects and programs related to this. In these 6 years, through workshops, technical assistance, and others, we have been approaching different prioritized issues, such as the barrier analysis, the as well as other issues for sustainable bioelectricity and the integration of the climate goals of the countries. In the last few years, especially in this last year, the challenges that the members of this community of practice have focused on have been more related to the need of strengthening bioenergy projects, and as a consequence, the mobilization of financing and the necessary funds for this. So the goal that we have that's like a platform is to promote collaboration, to join efforts, and to look for synergies. And in order to respond to these emerging needs, we have the opportunity to co-organize this event held today together with the project of CEFIM from the OECD and OECD CEFIM, as well as GCAP. With these three initiatives, we have consolidated this event where we will hear about the context and the perspectives for the development of bioenergy projects within the region. And we will learn about the successful cases of bioenergy development projects that are already working, and we will see the financial landscape with seen by the people who support these projects. So I believe that this event will be very fruitful for all participants, and that this will represent a milestone that will open a new opportunities for cooperation and investment opportunities for bioenergy in the face of the situation that we are all facing in the region. So I would like to thank the OECD, UCAB, and staff for the enthusiasm. As Aida said, that you have organized these great events. So thank you as well to everyone who has joined us as panelists and attendees. So my best wishes for this event. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aiden. Thank you for your kind words. That was a summary of the LEDS-LAC platform and the community of the bioenergy community of practice. This wouldn't have been possible without the support of OECD, as well as all the panelists that have joined us today from different parts of the world. And now I leave you with Cecilia Tam from the OECD, so she can also give some welcome remarks. Cecilia?
Thank you very much, Ida. And I'd like to welcome all of our speakers and panelists for joining this workshop today. Just maybe a couple of housekeeping points to start. So for those of you who have not already picked up on this, we do have interpretation. The function is at the bottom of your screen, depending on whether you'd like to listen to English or Spanish version of this event. The event is also being recorded. But we are running the meeting under Chatham House rules. We will we will be posting a recording of the event, and where we have the permission from speakers, we will make all of the slides available on our website after the meeting. For those of you who do not know the recording function, I'm just going to ask my colleague to quickly show the instructions of the interpretation, should you want to listen to the Spanish or the English version. My name is Cecilia Tam. I head up the OECD's Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilization Program, where we work with a small number of key emerging economies to help strengthen their domestic enabling environments to facilitate more finance for renewable and energy efficiency, as well as supporting work on decarbonizing industry. We've been working in Latin America very closely on a Colombia country program, and we'd like to thank Denmark for their generous support to the OECD that has made the program possible, and also in Colombia, and supporting us on this regional peer learning event. Clean energy solutions like sustainable bioenergy and waste to energy can play an important role in national decarbonization strategies and objectives. These solutions can also achieve multiple socioeconomic benefits, including improved reliability of energy supply, improved access to affordable and reliable energy in areas that are not currently connected to the national grid. And it also reduces the amount of waste going into capacity-limited landfills. This workshop aims to support dialogue among stakeholders in the Latin American and Caribbean countries on current challenges and opportunities for bioenergy finance and investment. And it will discuss priorities to help bridge the gap between investment-ready bioenergy projects and financial institutions looking to support clean energy finance. We hope this event creates a space for both project developers and financial institutions to present their perspectives and priorities. It is our first event, and we plan to hold a follow-up event next year that will focus on project matchmaking through presentation of investor-ready projects to financial institutions. We'd like to thank very much our partners in this regional peer learning event, the LEDS-LAC community of practice. Big thank you to Ana Maria Majano, Ida Figari, and Ida Lorenzo, and to NREL's Global Climate Action Partnership and Daniela Ruff for their partnership in organizing today's workshop. This event will build on the LEDS-LAC bioenergy community of practice, as well as the OECD's CEFIM program in Colombia, namely a publication we released earlier this year on enabling conditions for bioenergy finance and investment in Colombia. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone again for joining us today. And to help kick off our first session, I'd like to pass the moderation back to Ida Lorenzo, who will take us through our first session on the context for bioenergy project development. Thanks very much.
Gracias, Cecilia. Gracias por tus palabras.
Thank you, Cecilia, for your kind welcome remarks. And now let's get started with the first session. We have a lot of experts, friend of us related to bioenergy. So we are all related to bioenergy and we are passionate about bioenergy, of course. And have here Professor Luis Horta. I have the pleasure to know him for several years. Thank you very much, Professor Horta, for being with us. He has a lot of experience, but I can say that he is an engineer, a mechanics engineer, and he's a specialist in economy. He has a PhD in mechanic engineering, but he has worked for a long time to study the energetic systems biomass, and he has been international consultant in several institutions such as CEPAL, PNUD, MP, FAO, ONADE, IRENA, among others. So Professor Orta is going to tell us about the general context of bioenergy, and especially how this has been changing, and also the importance of having projects that they have had and that have been financed and why they have been successful. Professor Horta, we just have 15 minutes, and when you have 3 minutes left, I'm going to interrupt you so we can continue. Thank you. You're muted.
Perdón. Gracias, Aida. Gracias por esta excelente oportunidad de conversar con ustedes y presentarles algo de la visión que
This is an excellent opportunity to have a conversation with you about the vision that we have here in South America, in Brazil, in terms of bioenergy, and somehow about ethanol and biofuels, which are a very important into category of bioenergy, but somehow I just wanted to mention other things as well. And I would like to share my screen now. Can you see it now? Perfect, Professor. Please go ahead. We can see it. Okay, so these are some facts and perspectives about biofuels and bioenergy in general in our countries. So I just wanted to give you a more global overview. So I'm going to focus on sugarcane, which is something that we have in all of our countries. This is something that is very efficient, very competitive. I'm going to talk about the Brazilian experience and also project financing in bioenergy. So here we have a vision of the countries that are already adopting biofuels. That's something quite common in several countries, but it could be a lot more and it should be a lot more. So this is a more recent study that we did on the developing countries. And it's interesting to know that South America is a continent that already has very advanced technologies in terms of biofuels.
no tiene el nivel de adelanto.
There are others in Africa, for example, but they don't have the level that we have here in our country. So we could ask ourselves, can we go beyond that? Most likely, but what can we do? How can we do it? So we're going to try to explain this later on. So I would like to call your attention to the fact that bioenergy in this wide range of alternatives like wind energy and sun energy and other sources, bioenergy is some people think that bioenergy is something old, and that's not true. Actually,
Energía es
group of
seguramente la más
energies, bioenergy is pretty much the most important one. And I'm going to say it again, it's the most important one. And there are even sectors like the transport sector where bioenergy is by far the most important way to face the need of energy transition. I'm going to share this presentation, okay? So I'm not going to take too long this, but we have to have a short-term view, relatively speaking.
y la introducción más interesante.
So here we can see the pandemic and the inclusion of other fuels such as HVO, but it's important to see that it's quite reasonable that more than 5% of um, global biofuel consumption is based on biofuels. So the fuel consumption is based on biofuels.
Tiempos
So
lejanos, como 2070,
uh,
indica crecimiento de
now, if we see up to the year 2070, we see that
8 o 9 veces más
almost 8 or 9 times
Entonces,
more. It will be the consumption will be
esta
8 or 9 times more than it is nowadays. So we expect a diversification of technologies and mass introduction of biogas, biomethane, and other types of biofuels, and they're used in different ways. I'm mainly talking about biofuels like gas or liquid fuels, and I'm not really talking about yet about the great opportunity of the biodiversity that comes there. But well, I just wanted to mention very briefly that it's not only about mentioning the opportunity of more efficient biofuel efficiency, but actually different technologies like electric energy that doesn't really mean the electricity of the grid. I mean, I'm talking about biofuels that are associated to electric cars or vehicles like hybrid cars, like this Corolla car there, which is a vehicle that only issues less than 20 grams of CO2 per kilometer. It's the most efficient, less pollutant car that exists nowadays, but it uses ethanol. And in the case of hydrogen as well, this vehicle from Nissan, which is still a prototype, but it's a vehicle that produces hydrogen on board and it uses fuel cells in order to make this transportation more efficient. In terms of sugarcane now, we should focus on the fact that sugarcane is a resource that we know that we produce efficiently. It's the most efficient solar energy converter into biomass. I mean, one of the most efficient solar energy converter to biomass. Besides, we can grow it every year. We don't have to grow it every year like other crops. Uh, it's only planted once, and it can be harvested annually for 5 to 6 years. So it also allows to produce. I mean, 1 ton of sugarcane pro- produces an equivalent of equivalent to 1.2 barrel of petroleum. Sugarcane produces more than 100 barrels of oil per year and forever. So we have sugarcane crops in our countries for centuries. We've had them for centuries. So it's important to harvest this solar energy and to produce the feasible options for modern times. Now, this is a sugarcane plant in Brazil. I just wanted to show you that each unit of fossil energy produces 8 to 10 units or even 12, 15 units of renewable energy. So it's quite efficient, as I said before. Now, this we introduce technological mechanisms such as the use of, I mean, the use of biomass as fertilizer, the biological control of sugarcane borer, which were really important in order to make this more sustainable. Now, this graph shows the evolution of the sugarcane hill evolution and the conversion of sugarcane into bioenergy. So improvements in sugarcane production, logistics, and processing allowed a 260% increase in yield. And that means that they're using a lot less land or natural resources in order to produce bioenergy. And there's
frontera para
also
expansión, utilizando
a
los recursos
very big space for expansion. We also have a sugar cane trash recovery utilization, energy cane, second generation ethanol processes, precision agriculture, and biogas production from stillage and others. So I can use minimum supplies.
E aqui é um
Now
resumo
here you can see a summary of the global impact of
Entonces,
CO2 emissions per, to the per ethanol.
CO2 para la producción de la caña, resulta
Here we can see that the CO2 emission per 1,000 liters of ethanol, you can see that it's, the total CO2 emission is in case of gasoline is 3,368 kilograms, and in comparison to ethanol is 345 kilos. So that's the 90%. So bioenergy is a very strong agent in emission reduction. And this is what happened in my country in the year 1970. The traditional use, which was the domestic use, was bioenergy, but in the industrial sector, nobody used this bioenergy. But nowadays, we notice that the consumption has increased 5 times, fivefold in these more than 3 decades. And however, the residential or domestic sector reduction, and now the transport sector that didn't use bioenergy at all, now it uses 25.1% of this bioenergy in Brazil. And the industrial sector represents 40%. So there is a transition towards sustainability. And here you can see how traditional bioenergy, in the year, this stats are from the year 2019. You can see that the electricity also play a very important role. Electricity in Brazil from sugarcane, for example, represents 20% of electricity in Brazil comes from sugarcane. Now, just a few remarks on financing biofuel projects. There is no doubt that under favorable environmental conditions, biofuel projects can be competitive and sustainable. However, the scale of these projects is important. Small projects many times are not competitive. The scale effect favors the efficiency in many cases. So we need to take into account that uh, financing these projects face risks that need to be mitigated, climate risks, economic risks, and risks that have to do with uncertainties that have been introduced in the context where these projects are included. So we need to provide we need to do an appropriate assessment, a proper assessment, planning, and design. That's fundamental. That's a fundamental stage. Then, in order to financing, to have favorable conditions, in order to promote this development, the role of the government is crucial. I see that there are three different items that are important here then. First, the proper fuel specifications, the use of this bioenergy from to the transportation to the industry and so on. It needs to have the appropriate specifications. That's the role of the government. Also, even and foreseeable blending mandates. In every country where there was an appropriate introduction, and there are several cases in South America actually that have complied with they have that met these conditions. They had certain mandates. Without mandates, we cannot develop this market. And we also need for fair pricing schemes and tax regimes. These are key from that this should come from the government. If there's an appropriate pricing, then financing can be done under more interesting conditions. And finally, if bioenergy is well implemented, there are environmental and social differential benefits that are a lot more interesting than conventional energy. And the role of the government, once again, is to promote evaluation to consider these positive realities. There's a program in Brazil called Renova Bio, and it's quite interesting because it's been operating for 5 years, and it's quite surprising in my country because we had a lot of issues. We have different governments and so on, but Renova Bio still remains there, and it's based on meeting targets, and they focused on COP21 in Paris. I'm about to finish, Aida, don't worry about it. So it promotes greenhouse gas emission mitigation in line with Brazilian target setting COP21, and it is founded on three pillars. So there's the annual decarbonization targets were set by the government for a 10 years period to be accomplished by fossil fuel distributors. Now, companies that produce biofuels and that were certified by independent entities are able to issue CO2 emission reduction certificates, which guarantee the mitigating effect associated to biofuels. So, fuel distributors, biofuels producers, there is a way of issuing CO2 emission reduction certificates, and the price is set by the market, not the government. So that's something that's working quite well. And I just wanted to, just to finish, I just want to say that, look, bioenergy is something that needs to be seen with a lot of interest. Who's the country that is the champion in bioenergy? Who's promoting biofuels? Who's at the front line? I suppose it's a tropical country, hot weather country. That's not true. I'm talking about Finland. Come on. Finland in the last few years has been using more bioenergy than oil. And Brazil is not here yet, but we are working towards that. But that's something that makes me feel ashamed because Finnish are the ones that are maximizing in a sustainable way the use of bioenergy and using trees, which take 20 years to grow. And in our countries, in 5, 6 years, we can already use bioenergy after a year. So, I mean, this graph, I'd like to explain a lot more about this graph, but these are countries that have a low consumption level. No, no, they have a very high quality life in Finland. They don't use such amounts of energy. They use this for electricity to produce um, energy for industries and so on. But electricity energy with biofuel is something that's quite interesting for all countries if it's very well designed, of course. But well, I don't think I have any time left, but that's my short message for you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Horta, for your presentation. So energy is, we need to take account of energy in every country around the world because at the end of the day, this comes from biomass, and basically all of us want biomass, different types of biomass. We can generate bioenergy and have different applications in different sectors. So thank you so much, Professor, for your time. And now we're going to move on to the next presentation, which is about, today we're going to have Jilin Fan. He is from IRENA, and he's going to talk about the trends of bioenergy and the needs of policies in Latin America. This is very important because we're going to see that at the end, public policies have to do with how these bioenergy projects have been developing in your country. So welcome, Jilly. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And First, good morning, everyone. My name is Jinlei Feng. I'm the program officer at the International Renewable Energy Agency based in Abu Dhabi. So first, I would like to thank OECD Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilization, and also the LEDS-LAC Bioenergy Community for Practice for hosting this event and the invitation to Arena. So today I would like very briefly share some views and information about bioenergy consumption in LAC region and also highlight some barriers and policy recommendations. So first, I would like to give some global context at the beginning. So bioenergy actually currently contributes to the largest share, 2/3 of all the renewable energy consumption in the global level. So something like provided 12% of the total energy demand in 2019. But more than half of the bioenergy at global level is consumed for cooking and heating in the traditional way. So we know that 1/3 of the global population, around 2.4 billion people, still don't have access to clean cooking technology and the fuels. This part need to be phased out and replaced with clean fuels by 2030. And also, except of the traditional use, industry and residential are major consumption sectors. Based on the IRENA, our estimation, the global bioenergy consumption in 2019, 21% went to industry, the largest part, and then 12% to the residential heating in building sector, and also 7% for transport, and a smaller part to the dedicated for electricity. So globally, we see that wood pellet biogas has been used for renewable heat. For example, in Europe, China, North America, a smaller share of the biofuels also consumed for transport. For example, we can see in many Latin American countries and the US and also European Union. So in IRENA's 1.5-degree scenario, from the figures you can see, bioenergy actually will have a major role in the energy consumption in 2050. It can provide medium and long-term solution to decarbonize all end-use sectors. For example, especially some sectors, there are very few other renewable options. Bioenergy can provide feedstock and fuels for chemical sector, and also biojet fuel for aviation, and also bioenergy combined with carbon capture and storage will have an important role in the future. In the 1.5-degree scenario, we see that all the consumption and supply at the global level, we need to increase significantly. Then Latin America and the Caribbean region, this region remain at the center if we talk about global bioenergy development now and in the future. So let's have a look at consumption very briefly at the region. In 2020, based on IRENA, our data that bioenergy contributed in this region 2/3 of total renewable energy consumption. Is almost the same level of the global, but please note that most of the traditional use of the biomass for cooking may not include it because it's very difficult to get in the accurate number on this part. So if you look at the detail on the right side of the figure, the largest energy consumption sector for bioenergy in 2020 in LAC region was the direct combustion of the solid biofuels for mostly for industry and also some for the building sector. And this include the combustion of the biomass, especially the processed waste and used for the sugar mills, salt mills, pulp and paper industry. And another large share is bioethanol and biodiesel used for transport sector. 20% of all the bioenergy use in this region. And we all know that Brazil is a big player, but also Argentina. These two countries accounted for 94% of the total liquid biofuel consumption in the whole region. If we talk about biogas consumption, is negligible in this region. Let's have a closer look at the direct combustion of the solid biomass. So the three largest countries are Brazil, Mexico, and Guatemala. They have the largest to 70% of the region, the total of the region. If we say top 10, the country showing in this figure is around the 95% of total in this region. I think already Professor Luis already mentioned the Brazil example. For example, in Brazil, over 40% of the biomass actually used to provide heat for industry. And in the total heating consumption in this country, more than half is provided by bioenergy. So look at it, another part is liquid biofuel for transport. It's also a key consumption. So still, if you look at the Brazil, the largest part, it accounted for 90% of the biofuel consumption for transport in the whole region. In the country, a quarter of the transport fuel were provided by liquid biofuels in 2020. But the second and third largest are Argentina and Colombia. These two countries contributed to another 7%. And I would like to highlight also that Argentina is also the largest soy-based biodiesel producer of the world, not only for consumption in this country, but also it's one of the largest exporter of the biodiesel, soy-based biodiesel to European countries. So I would like to also briefly highlight the charcoal consumption. If you can see the right part, red part in this figure, a large number of the charcoal are used in Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and other countries. For example, in Brazil, industry sector consumed more than 80% of the charcoal, mainly for steel sector. Also, some part for the residential sector, for example, the barbecue. This is raised also some concern about the air quality issue. So a large number of bioenergy has been deployed, but to support the needed level for the energy transition for 1.5, still many barriers need to be overcome. Some cross-cutting barrier already listed here, but I would like to highlight that two important and also most relevant to the investment. The first is policy certainty, provide long-term signal to investment to develop, and also sustainability, which are the most urgent support needed to enable investment in general and global level. The last one, I will highlight the already mentioned the second cross-cutting issue, sustainability. We all know that it's a big issue and concern in all the policy making. And measures are highly context specific, can be different according to location. So today, I would like to share some general framework to ensure the sustainability may not suitable for this region, but also may provide some useful idea for stakeholders. I would highlight the most important is cross-cutting, cross-sectoral collaboration, and also regulatory framework, certificates, and also the last point I would highlight is some platforms and partnerships play an important role. For example, we know that at a global level, some very nice platform like GBAB, BioFuture platform, provide some very positive role in promoting the best practice. To summarize, the bioenergy is one of the most important components we see in the energy transition, help to decarbonize all the end use. Latin America and the Caribbean region is at the heart of this topic. So solid and liquid biofuels has been widely deployed, but still there are many gaps. Measures and policy regulations must be in place to maximize benefits and ensure sustainability. And I believe this meeting will bring some valuable recommendation and discussion for the sustainable development in this region and also for the world. So thank you very much. I'll stop here. Back to you.
Gracias, Jinlei, por su presentación.
Thank you, Jean-Lei, for your presentation. It was a general overview of bioenergy as well. It's very important to understand the importance of the development of public policies for these to make progress as other countries are doing it around the world, especially Brazil, as Luis Horta and Jean-Lei Fang mentioned. And now let's move on with the next presentation from section 1. We have the first panel, challenges for investment in bioenergy. We have 3 guests today. We have Micaela Moraz. She's from Global Bioenergy Partnership. She's also from the FAO. We also have Ananya Mahana, who's the coordinator of the practice community from the LEDS-LAC community of practice. And we also have Agustin Toroba, who is an expert in renewable energies. So we're going to proceed as follows. Micaela needs to leave very briefly, so we're going to start answering the first 2 questions with her, and then we're going to follow with Agustin and Maria. Micaela, we know that because of the role that you play in the GBEP platform, we wanted to know, from your perspective, what are the main barriers for investment in the bioenergy projects? How do you see these barriers in order to develop these bioenergy projects worldwide? Micaela?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Aida, for your introduction, and thank you also for the invitation to this important event. Well, in light of the experience of the Global Bioenergy Partnership, there are a number of barriers that we identified as relevant and that we are keen on to face as soon as we intervene in a country when we have to support a country for a bioenergy policy, for example. So first of all, the background that I would like to refer to is the importance of sustainability. It was mentioned by Luis Horta, it was mentioned by Jean-Lei, and I'd like to repeat again and again, because sustainability is really the key. Why I'm saying this? Because doing and developing a sustainability assessment gives you an overview of what is working well and what could be improved in terms of sustainability throughout whatever bioenergy value chain in a country. And there you can give your recommendation to policymakers in order for them to take an informed decision, informed policies. So the first barrier is really frequently policy uncertainty, because sometimes policy are not regular, are not long-term, doesn't give long-term perspective. And this is a disincentive for investors because they don't feel the trust of doing a big investment if after a 2-year period of time, the policy would change. Of course, that would be a problem. And again, the basics in order to avoid all this is to start, as I said, a sustainability assessment as a very first step when developing a bioenergy strategy. The second barrier that I see, and and which we normally recognize also whenever we do sustainability assessment in countries, it's also that sometimes as soon as we do a sustainability assessment, we recognize where the supply chain has examples of weakness. Sometimes it's the feedstock supply, which is not stable or not always sustainable, that could be improved. Sometimes is workers that are not very skilled on that specific value chain, or many other sustainability concerns under the 3 pillars, environmental. Let's keep in touch. Let's keep in mind that when we talk about sustainability, we don't talk about only environmental aspects, but it's environmental, social, and economic aspects, performances of the entire value chain, bioenergy value chain. And the third point that I wanted to mention in terms of barriers, first possible barriers and challenges, is the lack of awareness, not only in terms of training for farmers, for investors, for all the relevant stakeholders, but also the need within the same country for institutions that are relevant for bioenergy to talk each other. So every time it seems it goes by without saying, but it's important to highlight, because we normally establish a so-called multi-stakeholder working group in a country where we develop a bioenergy policy support. So all the relevant stakeholders on bioenergy or on that bioenergy value chain needs to talk each other, exchange experiences, data. It's essential. So those are my 3 main points regarding the barriers and how sustainability could really support overcoming these barriers. Thank you.
Gracias, Michela, por
Thank you, Michela, for such an interesting summary in terms of the barriers. And I share what you said. Project sustainability is very important, as well as focusing on the value chain and also feedstock, because we need that communication for projects to be sustainable and in the long term, of course. And the other question, a very short question, you've already talked about the barriers, but what about the challenges that projects have? Of course, this is very linked to barriers. Whenever they look for commercial financing, what are the challenges that these projects have found in order to settle and grow? Michela, please.
Thank you so much. Well, let's say that first of all, bioenergy development, bioenergy opportunities are very different country by country. So it's very context specific. So the first recommendation is no generalization. Bioenergy is not always good, it's not always bad. We take out the best from the opportunities depending on the context, on the specific context of the country. So that's the first point that I would like to highlight. And then again, as I mentioned before, investors have to feel comfortable in doing investment, but to do so, policies are needed. And to have policies that really fit the bioenergy context in a country, is important to start with the sustainability assessment first, study what's in place, how the bioenergy value chains could be improved, currently in place could be improved, and then intervene with the policy, not the way around. Sometimes we see governments putting targets in terms of blending targets, without having done a study in terms of bio-feedstock supply. So it's important the sustainability assessment first, and then the policy will go afterwards. And only if policies are stable, the investors will be confident to do investments. Very last point, it's important to look at bioenergy within the wider bioeconomy. We don't have to forget this, but I'm sure that our friend Agustin will mention these afterwards. Plenty of references, new references will be done, but it's important, of course, to look bioenergy not in isolation, but in the context of wider bioeconomy. Thank you so much, Aida. Thank you, colleagues. And sorry if I have to run in a few minutes, but thank you so much for this opportunity. Over to you.
Gracias, Miquela. Gracias por tu intervención. Muy
Thank you,
interesante.
Michaela, for your presentation. What you said, it was quite interesting. Actually, yeah, we need to see bioenergy as part of the bioeconomy of a country. So thank you so much for taking this time to
Continuamos.
be in another meeting. So thank you so much for joining us. And now we're going to continue with Ana Maria Majano. She is the coordinator of the LEDS-LAC Bioenergy Community of Practice. And we're going to focus on the barriers in investment for biogas. So there was a study that was done, and we're going to hear from the experience of the bioenergy community of practice. Many of our guests are part of that community of practice. Ana Maria, thank you for joining us. So what are the main barriers for investment that you saw in these studies, in these technical assistance that you provided to these countries? Go ahead, Ana Maria. Thank you very much, Aida. Can you see me? Can you hear me? We can hear you, but we cannot see you that well. Oh, there you go. Go ahead. It's just that I'm not in my office, so well. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for organizing such an important event. I just wanted to tell you that, well, I also coordinated this community of practice, this bioenergy community of practice before I did. And in that framework, we focused on providing technical assistance to different member countries. And as Michele said, the circumstances are very country specific. So I just would like to comment on the barriers of biogas based on a study that we did in Colombia, specifically on the barriers for investment in biogas and the most appropriate policies to approach them. And we also learned in the process in order to present a roadmap for biogas investment in Honduras. So in the study that we did in Colombia, we used a methodology that allowed us to prioritize the barriers to investment in biogas based on 14 potential risks and 41 potential barriers, and we prioritize them based on interviews and workshops with financiers, investors, and experts from different public and private institutions, the academia, as well as other stakeholders. So in this process, we prioritized four barriers as the most important ones in the country, according to the perception of developers mainly. One, the capital costs. Second, the limited experience of financial institutions with biogas projects. Third, the interconnection rules to the grids, and very important, the market perspectives of biojet, which is a product of biogas production, which can be a subproduct, sorry, it's a product that can be used as a fertilizer. So in a second level of barriers that were perceived with a medium priority, we found the quality and availability of biogas equipment in the market, the cost of operation, a lack of trained workforce, lack of technical information, lack of uncertainty, and so on. And this was based on costs, numbers, staff. And these were also barriers perceived by the stakeholders in the interviews that we developed in order to set the roadmap in Honduras. Later on, I will refer to financing, but right now I would like to mention something that has been mentioned in every single intervention before, which is the importance of public policies and knowledge management. In Colombia, we found out that in the country, there is a good number of policies and regulations that favor the development of biogas projects. However, These are very disseminated, and potential developers don't really know about them. The country already has technical rules and even fiscal incentives that apply to renewable energies, and they would apply to biogas as well. But many times, the potential developers, biogas project developers don't necessarily know about this, and they are not really from the energy sector, but they come from the agro industry, and they are not familiar with these regulations from the energy sector. Where we did find the need of new regulations and policies is for the commercialization of bio just data, which is for the financing of biogas projects. It was already mentioned how important it is to have appropriate public policies, but I just would like to finish this first intervention highlighting the importance of that public policy work to be coordinated and coherent with the different key stakeholders that are key for biogas development, because biogas and bioenergy in general not only depend on the energy policies, but also on the agricultural policies and the environmental quality policies, municipal regulations, and so on. So it's important for these public policy actions to have a long-term view, but also to be coherent and to do it in a coordinated way with all different institutions. It's also very important to invest in capacity building at every level and in knowledge management in order to overcome these barriers. Thank you, Ana Maria. It's quite interesting when we talk about biogas, as Miguel also said, the same rule doesn't apply to everyone. The contexts are very different. It's also very important to see the energy sector that is available, and policies are very important because it will be a lot more difficult for a biogas project to develop if we don't have the appropriate policies. And now we move on to Agustin. Thank you for joining us. As I said, he is a specialist in biofuels and renewable energies from IICA. He has a lot of experience, not only in bioeconomy, but also on biofuels. So Agustin, my question to you is, which do you think are the main barriers for investment in biofuel projects? Agustin? Good morning, and thank you very much, Ada, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to share this panel with Michaela and you, and you. It's a pleasure to meet you, Ana Maria. It's also a pleasure to share this panel with you. Well, as it was said before, I mean, Aida, I'm going to focus more on liquid biofuels, if that's okay with you. I'm going to try to be very specific. I think the main issue is that the only barrier to financing nowadays is for business to exist. I mean, biofuels need to be a business. And then, of course, we have different things. For example, Michaela mentioned that nowadays the bank wants this business to be sustainable in terms of social, economic, and environmental aspects. But biofuels, where is there a business? I would say there are two different types of businesses, and there's business when there's a market. Of course, there's also business when there's no market and self-consumption. But I'm just going to focus on the fact on the situation when there is a demand, when there's a market, and there could be two different levels of demand. If we have external markets, then at a country level, there is much to be done, but it is important, and I will focus on the fact that there should be local demand. And for that to happen, the main condition is to have the appropriate legislation. We sort of talked a lot about the mandates and price fixing mandates, but if there's an appropriate regulation, I think that at private level, the main challenge to have a liquid biofuel business is a economic geography problem. Why? As well as others, of course, but mainly because biomass is a product that usually travels a lot and really badly. Its volume is quite large, and its transport costs are not marginal. I'm just going to give you an example from my country. I see that Manuel Ron is here from Biofor, and he's going to speak later on. But well, we have corn in Cordoba, which is a province in the middle of in the center of Argentina. And if it goes to the port, that's pretty much 20% of the costs of the crops and harvesting and all that. They talked about sugarcane in Brazil. We know that it's not logical for sugarcane to be moved more than 50 or 60 kilometers away from where it was harvested. Uh, why is this an economic geography issue? Not only because of the costs, logistic costs from the primary sector, but also in the industrialization sector and the transportation to the big consumption centers. Many times, the feedstock is far away from these consumption centers of liquid biofuels. So the problem is how I maximize this from the economic geography point of view, this problem. And something that adds certain degrees of difficulty is that the industry of liquid biofuels is a multi-product industry. I not only get ethanol from sugarcane or from corn, and I not only get biodiesel from HVO production and so on and so forth. I get a lot more subproducts like distilled grains, corn oil, CO2, mixing in the case of biodiesel. So all of these subproducts add certain degrees of complexity to these economic geography that I'm telling you about. And the third point, uh, just to complement the legal aspect, I think that an interesting way of thinking about the legal aspect in the countries, I mean, how I can get the best regulatory framework to promote biofuels in our countries is to think about this. I mean, to be very simple, to think similarly to how public policies are structured in renewable energies. And this is very simple because when you see the regulatory frameworks of renewable energies, energy of different countries, it's quite similar to what Luis Horta said today, the existence of mandates. There are certain goals in the electric grids and in biofuels. Even though it's true that this could become more complex, we shouldn't make it even more complex. We have to see the amount of liquid biofuels we use in the fossil fuels matrix. And I apologize if I went too far, Aida. Thank you, Agustin, for that point of view. That is a macro point of view in terms of liquid biofuels. It's very important to clearly understand public policies for this development. And obviously, if there's a demand and a short demand, of course, the financing will be a lot easier. And now let's move on with the second question for Ana Maria in terms of the biogas studies that have been done in the uh, community of practice, and which have been the main challenges in biogas projects for financing. Ana Maria?
Sí, Aida, muchas gracias. Y ahí quisiera
Yes, thank you, Aida.
hablar.
And I would like to say that I'm going to talk about commercial funding because obviously there are projects that are funded with non-refundable resources, but when we talk about commercial funding, obviously, as Agustin said, this needs to be viewed as a business. And even though you heard that I mentioned that the developers mentioned the lack of experience on financial institutions for biogas projects, many times this means a lack of trained personnel to take advantage of the opportunities of this type of projects. And people from the financial sector and people from the productive sector and the biogas sector have the idea that this is not a profitable business. that
Y aquí
the
entonces
biogas
quisiera
projects don't have
referirme que
good
uno de
numbers.
los
So I
mayores
would like
retos
to
de
say
los
that one of
desarrolladores
the main
tecnológicos para
challenges for the
encontrar este
developers
financiamiento comercial
to
es
find this
estructurar un modelo
commercial funding
financiero que
is to
sea
structure the financial
financieramente y
model
comercialmente
so
viable.
it becomes
Y en este punto
profitable.
lo que hemos aprendido,
And what we've
como
learned at
ejemplo
this point,
de uno de
for
nuestros miembros,
example,
agrogeneradora, que
from
voy a
one of
hablar
our
o presentar en el
members,
siguiente panel,
Agrogeneradora, who's
es
going to
que
present on the
en
next
muchos
panel,
casos la
is
inversión de un
that
proyecto de biogás
many
no se
times the
recupera
investment on a
solamente
biogas
con el
project
precio
is
o
not
costo de la
recovered
o
only
costo de oportunidad
with
de la
the
energía, sino que
opportunity
debe
cost of the
considerarse
energy, but
toda la cadena
it
de
needs
valor
to
y tratar de
consider the
monetizar
whole
todos los
value
ingresos
chain
o
and
ahorros
try to
después, por
monetize
ejemplo, el
every
costo evitado del
income
ingreso por
and every
metabolismo de
cost
los
saving.
desechos
For
orgánicos,
example, the
el
cost
uso
for the
o el
organic
ahorro en el
waste
uso de
management
fertilizantes o bien la
or savings in
comercialización
the
del
use of
biodigestate, el
fertilizers
incentivo
or in
fiscal
the
para usar
commercialization of the
energías
digestato or
limpias y cuándo
the
es posible
fiscal
dar este
benefits applied
certificado de
to
uso
renewable
sostenible. Es
energies
decir,
and
tratar de
also
ver
a
todos
credit
los
for emission
ingresos
reduction.
potenciales,
So
todos los
trying to
negocios de esos
all the
diferentes
potential
productos
income
y subproductos del
from these
proyecto. Y
different
aquí debo
products and
recalcar que
subproducts.
este
And
no es solamente
I
un
must
tema de
highlight that
conocimiento y de
this is not
capacidades.
only
Si bien hemos
an issue of
encontrado que
knowledge and
muchos
capabilities.
desarrolladores o potenciales
We've found
desarrolladores
that
de
many
profesionales de instituciones
developers
financieras
and
no
the
tienen claro
staff
este
of the
tema.
financial
Pero
institutions are not
vuelvo al tema de la
really clear
política
on
pública,
this.
es
And
un
I go
tema
back to the
de cómo
public
la
policy.
política pública
This is an
puede
issue
ayudar
of
también
how
a
public
que se
policies
pueda
can help
dar valor a esos
to give
financiero,
value
digamos, a esos
to
beneficios
financial
que
value
tiene
to
la
these
producción de
benefits
biogás, ¿verdad? Entonces,
that
por
the
ejemplo, los
biogas
productores
production
agropecuarios
has. So, for
tienen
example,
una
from
obligación
when
legal
the
por la legislación
stock breeding
eh,
producers have a legal
lo llamaremos de
obligation
desechos, de gestionar adecuadamente
regarding
los propios
waste
desechos,
management,
pues
then
ese
that
negocio se puede
waste
monetizar.
or the cost of that
Igualmente,
waste can be
para el
monetized.
aprovechamiento del biodigestato como
Same way
fertilizante,
for
en
the
algunos
use of the
países solo
gestato as a
debe hacerse
fertilizer.
si
In
existe
some
una legislación
countries, this
bioespecífica para su
can be
uso
done if there
y
is
en
technical
algunos
regulation for its
todavía no
use.
existe.
And
Entonces,
in some countries don't have
dadas
this
las
still.
limitaciones
So given
del tiempo,
the
quisiera
time
finalizar,
constraints,
¿verdad?
I would like
Reiterando que
to
para crear
finish
el
my
ambiente de
intervention
inversión favorable para el
highlighting
desarrollo del
that
biogás,
in order to
se
create
requiere
a
la
favorable
contemporaneidad de
environment
las
for biogas,
diferentes
we require
entidades
a
encargadas de
coordinated
política
action
energética
by the different
agropecuaria, climática y
entities in
calidad
charge
ambiental
of
y en nuestro
energy
caso las
policy
municipalidades,
and
así como un esfuerzo
also the municipalities. And we need
concertado para
a
mejorar el
joint
conocimiento de la
effort to
tecnología, las
improve the
operaciones
knowledge, the
y otros aspectos
technology,
clave que
the
hacen que
regulation,
ese
and
modelo
other key aspects
financiero
that make
que los
this
números
financial
den,
model
¿verdad? Que sea
profitable,
negocio y que
that
podamos
it's
entonces pasar
suitable
de
for business.
iniciativas y
And this way
proyectos
we can move
interesantes
from
pero dispersos de
initiatives and
biogás a
interesting
aprovechar todo
projects
el potencial de beneficios
to
económicos, sociales y
take
ambientales
advantage of the
que
whole
esta tecnología
economic,
tiene
social,
para la región.
and environmental
Gracias.
potential that this energy has for the region. Thank you.
Interesante ver esa parte.
Thank you, Ana Maria. It's really interesting to see what we need to fund these projects, and biogas is treated one way, and with the last intervention of Agustin, we're gonna see what happens with the liquid biofuels. And in session 2, we're gonna have successful cases. So we're gonna treat
Reflexión
each
final.
one differently. Agustin, a final comment regarding liquid biofuels and the challenges that we may have for that commercial funding. Assuming that we already have a mandate
Un proyecto
when we
biocombustible.
want to fund a biofuel project, what do you see as the challenges that the countries may have? For example, Guatemala. Yes, well, Guatemala is a good example. The challenge is to have commercial potential in order to sell the biofuels, bioethanol, biojet. That's the main challenge. And I opened the discussion in two markets. The external market, today Guatemala has an export market for ethanol, and now it's going for the domestic market. And In a business, you may have risks and you may have uncertainties. And these are two barriers for funding. The risk is measurable. I can allocate a likelihood degree, but uncertainty is different. Many times, uncertainty cannot be measured and it can block a credit. And there's a lot of things and that happens in Latin America that a president is removed or have a huge financial crisis that can nullify the credit. But regarding the risks, you may have risks that are inherent to the business, and this is managed with outstate contracts or solving the economic or financial geography issue. It's not that it's not important, but it's more manageable by the businessman. But there are two risks that are not manageable by the businessman, and we need to work through the institutions. The regulatory risk and the sovereignty risk. And this happens in the oil industry. They have a geologic risk and regulatory risk. And many times these risks end up being heavier than the geological risk. And what's this regulatory risk? Well, I may have a very good regulatory framework, and maybe that framework is disrupted, it's modified, and I have an investment horizon, but the bank may say, I'm not giving you the credit because according to this regulation, you should have a 10% mandate, and this was not met. So that's an issue to be worked from the institutions. And another recurring issue in our countries is the sovereignty risk, the macro stability, the political stability. These are things that you cannot control, but can have an influence on the business risk and on the business uncertainty. These are three things that we should keep in mind. Thank you, Aida. Thank you, Agustin. We thank you both for your participation. We are a bit behind on the agenda. We see that there is a lot of questions and comments. We don't have time for questions now. We can put it on the chat. You're welcome to participate in this bioenergy community of practice. The idea is to exchange opinions, to see the risks of the bioenergy projects, and maybe Dr. Horta, you can have 30 seconds before going to the next panel. Thank you, Aida. Well, this was very interesting. Thank you for your presentations. I forgot to mention two important points from the funding point of view. As Agustin said, there is in the case of bioenergy, there is a lower technology risk. And I'm not talking about second generation. I'm talking about what we used to do, ethanol. So this is very favorable for energy. And there are cases with private banks in Brazil that are issuing variable interest rates according to the compliance with goals and sustainability indicators, reducing or lowering according to the emissions, according to third-party evaluations. So there is a sector that can mitigate emissions, and that sector is the bioenergy. And we're going to use this as a factor related to funding, and we need to exploit it. Thank you, Aida. Oh, thank you, Professor Horta. With this, we conclude the first session. it's very important to identify what are the project types, what is the context. Each project is different, and we need to take into account the whole value chain to see where we can generate more profits to make it sustainable economically, and it needs to last due to public policy. So thank you very much, Ana Maria, Agustin, and Dr. Horta. And now I will leave the floor to Daniela Roth. She's going to facilitate the next session. Hello, everyone. I'm Daniela Raff, coordinator of international credit from the Renewable Energy Lab from the US, represented the Global Climate Action Partnership, formerly known as the SGP. We have heard from several experts about the landscape of bioenergy projects in LAC, the challenges that we found to get funding, and some trends to create favorable conditions for bioenergy projects. Now we're gonna hear from representatives of bioenergy companies that have overcome many of these barriers and that gotten funding to implement their projects successfully. These have brought several benefits. We're going to hear about the enabling conditions, the business models, good practices, and technical assistance that have led them to have success in their bioenergy projects. I would like to introduce our panelists. We have three panelists with experience developing successful bioenergy projects in the LAC region. We have Javier Castellanos, representative of the Grupo Central Agrícola from Guatemala. We also have Manuel Aron from Bio4, a biofuel company from Argentina, and Juliet Lombo from Reto Energía, focused on biomass projects for rural electrification in Colombia. Thank you. We have the three panelists ready. Yes. Hi, good morning. I see Javier, Juliet, and Manuel. Are you there? Yes, I'm here. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna start with very short presentations from the panelists. They're going to present about their projects and what they have learned in this process. We're gonna start with, well, Manuel Ron, if you're ready, you can start. Okay.
¿Están viendo mi pantalla?
Can you all see my screen? Yes. Can you zoom in, please? Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm gonna tell you about our trajectory in the bioenergy sector. We are decarbonizing the energy matrix for 10 years. We produce first bioethanol, and this is mixed in all fuels in Argentina. And then we have produced biogas derived from different organic materials and organic waste to produce electrical energy that is going to be injected in the Argentina electrical grid. We have 13% of renewable energies, and bioenergy have a small part. Solar energy and wind energy have a higher percentage. This is the Bio4 plant. This is an ethanol plant. We have decarbonized over 230,000 tons, and this is the mass balance. We use over 230,000 tons of corn a year. Unlike Brazil, they use sugarcane ethanol, but in Argentina, 70% of ethanol comes from corn, and we produce bioethanol, WDEGS, which is the subproduct the wet subproduct, we do not dry to in order to have less emissions. Then we have corn oil and CO2 from fermentation. These are pictures from the Bio4 plant where the corn is grinded, is fermented. It's fermented with sugar, and once the alcohol is produced, it's distilled, and then we use 99.5 to mix it with the fuel. This is Bioelectrica. We call Bioelectrica the biogas plants. We have developed a biogas engineering company in these 7 years. We have generated a substantial know-how, and we decided to set up a company that it's selling engineering in Argentina. We try to export to Brazil and the US. We have developed an integration between biogas and bioethanol, and the biogas plants use industrial waste. In this case, this is the main supply. We use also dairy serum. We have environmental passives or waste, like the waste from the central market, fruits and vegetables that cannot hit the shelves. We use them on the plant. Also manure from livestock, and corn is the main crop here in the area, and we use it as a backup in case any of the other supplies fails. We produce energy, thermal energy, electric energy. We are not producing biomethane, and also the biofertilizer that the previous speaker mentioned, Ana Maria, that is used to replace synthetic fertilizers and lower the carbon footprint in the area. The evaluation of this product is a pending task in order to sell it, and this has to do with regulation. These are images of the biogas plants. Here we have the anaerobic digestion and the biogas process. This is a filtered, and they have an alternator, and we are generated 7 electrical megawatts from this organic waste. This is another livestock project. They eat a part of the wet product that comes from the plant. The wet DGS is transformed in animal protein, and the manure of these livestock goes back to the plant. So we have a circular economy. Here you can see the bioethanol plant. Here comes the corn. From the bioethanol plant, we produce bioethanol, oil, and the co-product. This goes for the animal feed. The manure goes back to the biogas plant.
Planta de bioetanol también.
And here we have all the subproducts, and in the biogas plant, we produce these products: electrical energy, biofertilizer, and thermal energy, and we use this to fertilize the corn that we use in the ethanol plant. This is a large-scale example of circular economy, and this reduces the carbon footprint from the ethanol plant. It reduces the intensity in 10 points. So we produce low carbon biofuel, and we have this process patented in the US, where there is over 200 corn ethanol plants. So we are looking for a partner in the US to sell this technology to the plants that are interested in reducing their carbon footprint to access more demanding markets. And this last slide shows the potential in Argentina. Here we have the pork production in Argentina. These animals generate waste and they generate methane, and we could transform all these organic remainder that are in the pig's manure. We have also industrial production of other animals, and on the left we see the main gas pipes in Argentina, and all these biogas may be transformed in biomethane with an upgrade process, and we can inject this biomethane to the gas pipes. This would mix with the natural gas, but this depends on the mandates, on the public policies, and how or how much they require the percentage of renewable energies or the renewable fuels. And this is a very good possibility also for electrical energy. The biomethane, it's a very important opportunity in Argentina. We don't have a regulatory framework yet, and this is what we do in Bio4 in the related companies, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you. Thank you, Manuel. Excellent presentation. It's great to see all these benefits to maximize efficiency and the circular economy. If you have any questions, you can write them on the chat, and we're going to have a discussion after all the presentations. Now we continue with Juliet Lombo. Juliet, can you share your screen?
Ya me confirman que la están viendo, por favor.
Okay, can you all see my screen? Yes.
Gracias.
Yes, perfect. Well, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to present our project. In Colombia, this type of energy is something new, and there are some challenges in the process. So I'm going to present our electrical energy from forest biomass. This is called Refo Energy Vida. First, a bit of context. We, as an organization, belong to the Valorem group, who operates sustainable businesses through RFC. We have the Refo Costa, which is for timber commercialization, then Refo Panel, Refo Energy to generate renewable energy, Refo Mass, biomass production, Canal Clima, meteorological and environmental services, and Reforcer, which are forest services. I'm going to play a video.
No se puede escuchar el video, no sé si puedes compartir.
We cannot hear the video.
No sé cómo compartirles el audio del video, entonces.
Están los audio settings, pero bueno, no sé si hay tiempo.
Yeah, we cannot hear the audio.
Tienes que dejar de compartir y luego
I think you need to stop sharing, and there's an option to share with sound.
Creo que en video settings lo puedes poner que comparta también su
I
audio.
think you can select that on video settings.
Dejar de compartir.
O si quieres, puedes hablar durante el video.
Or if you want, you can talk over the video.
Voy a omitir el video y vamos a seguir con la presentación.
Okay, let's just skip the video and continue with the presentation.
El video como tal les muestra como el proceso de nuestra planta, pero aquí
The video showed our plant process.
ilustrativo. ¿En qué consiste como tal? Bueno,
And
el cultivo como tal de la madera.
we
Nosotros
start with the crops. We are growing eucalyptus.
se pueden aprovechar
Then
desde el año, pero igual son
we
cíclicas.
can use these crops after a year. And once we cut down some trees, we grow more to have more sustainability. When we cut down the trees, these are taken into the plant. We store some of the material to have a reserve, and the rest goes to the wood chipper. Then it enters to the boiler, and the water heats up. There's a water vapor who moves the turbine. The turbine generates electricity, and this electricity is sent to the electrical company. This is the generation process. We are generating 80 to 100 hours per year per operation,
50 toneladas de dióxido de carbono al año.
and we are capturing over 6,000 tons of CO2 a year, because the trees, while they grow, they capture CO2. The idea is to become a carbon neutral project. We are located in Puerto Carreño in the Vicha department. We have a population of 18,000 people. This is in the border with Venezuela. Puerto Carreño got its energy from Venezuela until 2020. They generate their energy with diesel. Puerto Carreño is not part of the interconnected plan in Colombia, so the activity is a bit more complex. We have a challenge in accessibility, because the access points are really complicated. Since from Bogota, a trip to Puerto Carreño may take between 7 and 12 days. And by river, it took between 7 and 8 days to get there. So there are difficulties in the accessibility and also the weather condition. These are some pictures of the plant construction. We've seen here the mounting of the boiler. And the thing to highlight here is the social aspect. Puerto Carreño doesn't have many sources of employment. The plant generated over 180 jobs, direct jobs, over 50 indirect jobs, and this was during the construction. And during operation, we have 49 direct jobs, 40 locals, and 9 national. This project was successful, and it had 30% of its own capital, and 70% was funded through banks. In this case was the Banco Bogotá. The financial stakeholders diminished the risk in order
Sostenible, porque pues es un tema
materials
de
acquisition
incertidumbre
is
a la
sustainable, because that generates
del proyecto.
in the banking system. And we needed to prove sustainability of the project in social and environmental aspects. Our plant has a gross power of 5.5 megawatts, net power of 4.5 megawatts. It has a biomass consumption of 1.44 ton per megawatts. The technical specifications, well, we have 24 tons per hour of steam. with 68 bar in the turbine, 485 degrees, and a self-consumption of 1 megawatt. Here we can see
de 18 meses.
plantations. These are of 18 months, 36 months, and we have 130 tons per day entering the plant. And this is an example of the cutting of the trees. We have a calorie power between 2,500 and 3,500 calories. And what are the next steps? Well, we need to improve the EV grids. The EV is the company that distributes electricity. So we need to improve the species genetics. We need to improve the processing of the timber and the species that we use for combustion. And also we need to improve the drying process.
Pues de la demanda, porque pues esto
And
trae beneficios a Puerto Carreño, por lo cual
this has brought benefits to Puerto Carreño. So this has meant an economic growth for the town. And we need to work with organizations like UPME, CREC, and IPSE, which are the regulators for energy in Colombia. And we have a new project called Refo Energy Villanueva to generate 25 megawatts. So this is our project.
Juliet.
Thank you
Excelente.
very much, Juliet. Excellent project. It was really good to see in the benefits like the jobs created, and this may help justify the funding of this type of project. Like I said, if you have any questions, you can write them on the chat, and we're gonna review them after the next presentation. Now I'd like to invite Javier Castellanos from the Grupo Central Agrícola from Guatemala.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenos
Javier,
días.
can you share your screen? Hello, good morning.
Me dicen cuando vean mi
Sí,
presentación.
Please let me know if you can see my screen. Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
¿Qué tal? Buenos días. Mi nombre es Javier Castellanos. Primero
Good
que
morning,
nada,
I'm
gracias por
Javier
la invitación para
Castellanos.
compartirles un
Thank
poco
you
de lo
for
que
the
estamos
invitation
haciendo en el
to
sector
share a bit of
bioenergía en
what we're
Guatemala.
doing in Guatemala
Nosotros,
in the bioenergy
agrogeneradora,
sector.
generamos energía eléctrica
We are
renovable
agrogeneradora. We
de
generate
biogás
renewable electrical
como residuos
power from
orgánicos.
biogas,
Un
and
poco
we use
de nuestra
organic
historia, pues
waste.
nosotros
A bit of
iniciamos en
our
el
history,
2015 con
we
una solución
started
para
in
nuestros
2015
residuos
as a
y
solution
residuos de
to
terceras
treat our own
industrias.
waste.
Estamos operando desde el
We
2018
have been in
con
operation
residuos
since
propios. En el
2018 with
2021
our own
desarrollamos nuestra
residues,
plataforma
and in
de energía.
2021,
Ya empezamos a darle
with our
tratamiento a
HEDO platform,
residuos
we started
externos.
treating external
Entonces, así es
waste.
como nuestro modelo de negocio.
And
Generamos energía eléctrica,
this is
gestionando
our business
residuos
model.
y
We
a la vez
generate
ayudamos a
electrical
reducir
energy, we
emisiones de
manage
CO2.
waste, and we
Como es nuestro
capture
modelo de
CO2
economía circular
emissions.
o a qué le estamos
This is our
apuntando
circular
en el
economy
presente y en el
model.
futuro?
This is what
Pues con
we
los residuos de
aim.
alimentos,
We
excretas,
have
también tenemos una parte de
food
rastros
waste,
hacemos una
manure.
relación las dos
We have
presentaciones
also
anteriores,
crop
que son
waste.
un complemento también de lo que
The two
nosotros
previous
hacemos, que son
presentations
tanto
were interesting because
alimentos
it's a
como
complement of what we
bioindustriales,
do. We
como
use
también
food waste,
rastrojos
industrial
como las
waste,
fibras, pastas
and
de
also
crecimiento rápido
crop waste or
para generar energía renovable. Y entonces le estamos apuntando a ir
rapid
desplazando
growth
el uso de los combustibles
grass.
fósiles, máximo en
We
Guatemala,
aim
que
to
con una
displace
certificación
the
de
use
nuestro
of
país en
fossil
electricidades
fuels,
es
and especially in
mayoritariamente
Guatemala,
combustibles
where
fósiles.
the electrical grid is
Estamos
based on fossil
reutilizando
fuels, we are
nutrientes de alto valor.
reusing
En el
high
caso
value
de los
nutrients.
biofertilizantes,
In the case of
actualmente el
biofertilizers,
proceso de digestión anaeróbica,
with
pues
the
actualmente lo
effluent of
utilizamos
our anaerobic
para
process,
nutrir
we
nuestros
use this
pastos que después son
to
alimentados en nuestra planta de tratamiento de residuos y
put
pues a
on
la vez
our
haciendo todo este
grass,
proceso pues evitamos
and with this
emisiones
process
al medio
we
ambiente.
avoid emissions to the environment. Now, what type of waste and what are our capability? We have a capability of 80,000 tons of liquid organic waste. We have juice, oils, points, and all kinds of liquid residues. And we can also treat 7,300 tons a year of solid organic waste. We have waste of grass, markets, supermarkets. And how do we generate renewable energy? Right now we have a generation capacity of 8,000 megawatts a year. We have 1 megawatt hour capability. We use the biogas as a fuel. We generate biogas from our raw materials. This is organic, general organic waste. We degrade them in a anaerobic digestion process. We have two biodigester of 3,000 cubic meters. We generate a biogas. We are generating between 8 and 9,000 cubic meters a day of biogas. And with this capability, we cover the demand for our operations, and we also sell this as renewable energy. We're aiming for a decarbonization because, like I said, our electrical grid is mainly based on fossil fuels. We not only generate renewable energy, we not only treat or manage our residues, we not only generate biofertilizers for our own use, but also we are counting the environmental benefit for these emissions. We are working on our own tool, but the objective is to certify this tool to share in these benefits. And these are figures from 2021. As you can see, we treated between 35 and 4,500 tons a month of organic waste, and we avoided 4,500 tons a month of CO2 emissions. This is our plant, and we are aiming to increase the capacity to treat waste so we can include more industries. We are planning to launch a biofertilizers brand so we can share the benefit of a high nutritional content. This way we can increment the benefits for Guatemala. Thank you. Thank you very much, Javier. Great presentations. Thank you for the panelists and congratulations for your projects. In it, if you have a question, you can write it on the chat. And I'd like to ask some general questions to the panelists so we can learn about their experience. I'm going to start with a question for Manuel Arron. The question is, what are the key elements of the enabling environment for investments in bioenergy?
Digamos, el ambiente debería tener, como dijeron anteriormente,
The environment should provide an appropriate regulatory framework.
A través y sobre todo los bancos a la hora del financiamiento,
and especially in the banks,
they
value very much a PPA. And when there is a regulatory framework, in the case of Argentina, it's a state company that purchases the energy, and this generates a lot of certainty for the funders. That and the guarantees of the partners. In our case, we are a grower association, we have formed a company, and this gives the financial institutions a lot of certainty because we have in ethanol and biogas a group of producers, and this provides robustness to the loans. So I think an appropriate regulatory framework and good contracts, and those contracts need to be high incentives at the beginning, because at the beginning there is the most risk. So at the beginning we should have higher rates because the companies need to pay back the loans, and there's also a learning curve. So PPAs with good prices that are reducing, so the fare is not as expensive for the end consumer. And once the companies are working, they can start looking for waste in the cities and charge for those residues and start monetizing some other outputs. So it's good to have a good regulatory framework from the start. Okay, excellent. Very good suggestion. I think we've seen this model in other renewable energy projects. Thank you, Manuel. Now we move on to the next question for Javier Castellanos and Juliet Lombo. What type of business model can help the investment to be more profitable, according to your experience?
Javier, Juliet, ¿quién quiere iniciar?
I don't know, Javier or Juliet, who wants to start? Well, we can say that the business model that could be successful is a partnership between the public and the private sector. The public sector is in charge of distribute and sell the energy that we produce, and they can guarantee the return of investment in the life cycle of the project. And we made the initial investment, and we need obviously the appropriate regulatory framework. So I would say a partnership, a public-private partnership. Okay, great, thank you. Javier? Well, the business model, well, it's a circular model where we not only have a single product, we must have several products in different sectors. In our case, we are in the energy sector, in the waste management sector, because this is a profitable service, and we are also working on biofertilizers for the agricultural sector to generate more revenue. Okay, thank you. And I have another question for you that is more technical. What type of technical support has helped you with your projects to attract private funding? Well, Agrogeneradora received a technical assistant when we started with the project. So my recommendation is to focus on technical assistance, especially in the pre-investment stage. These are going to help to reduce uncertainty. And for example, we can have pilot plans and even software that may convince private banking. This way we can receive these funds. So we need to invest in engineering, in design, and we reduce the risk. Okay, perfect, great suggestions. And we all taking them into account. And one last question for Manuel and Juliet. what are the lessons learned or the good practices that you've seen to find funding for these bioenergy projects? What can you tell us from your experience? Well, a good practice for us was the partnerships. When we built our first plant of 1.2 megawatts,
Todavía no había PPAs en la Argentina.
we still didn't have any PPAs in Argentina, and we couldn't find any funding. The project got delayed because certain problems with the customs. Many of the equipment was brought from Germany, and if we didn't have many producers because, well, we had an initial investment of $4 million, and it was a little more in the end due to these custom issues, and we were 30 growers. So if we were only one or two, the project would have failed. So the partnership was really helpful. Everyone contributing with a small part. And I think that partnership with the growers, I think this is a very good option because it provides robustness to the projects, especially for the beginning, where if you have a very few growers, then the risk is going to be higher. So that would be my recommendation. Okay, great recommendation. Thank you, Manuel. And Juliet, what can you tell us? Well, from our experience, there we needed to educate the bank stakeholders because there's a lot of ignorance around this. So we should be able to explain the business to them accurately.
De la biomasa. O sea, la biomasa es un sostenible, se va a hacer en
For
estos tiempos.
example, on the biomass, we need to tell that it's sustainable. We need to educate them so the risk is lower for them and they are more willing to invest in this type of project. And we also need to foster the economic growth of the area. And it's very important for them, the social aspects, the sustainable development, and others. Okay, perfect. Very good examples. I think we can all learn from these experiences. Thank you very much. I hope that the financial entities are listening so they can write down these recommendations. And on the next panel, we're gonna have presentations from financial entities so we can hear their perspective to complement the perspective. So thank you very much to the panelists. It was really educational for all of us. Thank you for your time. If there are more questions for the panelists, you can write them on the chat. Thank you again, and we close the second session. Thank you, and now I'm going to leave you with Laila Davies from OECD to continue with session 3.
Thank you, Daniela. Welcome to the third session of this workshop on finance and investment in bioenergy. As Daniela said, my name is Laila Davis, and I'm an OECD policy analyst with the Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilization team. For those of you who are just joining, please note that we do have interpretation, Spanish and English, so you can choose which language. And also, please feel free to use the chat function to submit any questions in case there is time at the end for further questions. As discussed in the earlier sessions, there are a number of challenges that bioenergy faces across the LAC region. For example, commercial lenders and investors can be reluctant due to lack of familiarity with the economics or risks of bioenergy projects. Gaps in the enabling policies or regulations can also create additional barriers or negatively impact on the economics of projects. In order to scale up bioenergy, solutions to improve access to commercial finance and increase levels of private investment will be essential. Development finance can play a critical role here in both capacity building and in de-risking projects. This panel will discuss the finance and investment landscape for bioenergy, and we are joined here today by 4 esteemed panelists who can share insights on the topic from the perspective of development partners, development banks, and international platforms. On this panel, we have Ludmila Diniz, climate change and energy specialist at the UNDP. We also have Alejandro Miranda, Principal Executive in the Climate Action and Environment Directorates at CAF. We also have Arthur Milanez, Biofuels Program Lead at the Brazilian Development Bank, BNDES, and Gerard Ostheimer, the Coordinator for the BioFuture Platform Campaign. So firstly, I will turn to Ludmila from the UNDP. Thank you, Ludmila, for joining us today. My first question would be, having supported bioenergy projects and waste-to-energy projects as well at various phases of development and maturity, could you tell us about some of the different challenges these projects have faced and how UNDP programs have helped address these?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the invitation of OECD. So the projects UNDP are involved are mainly financed by multilateral and bilateral donors, or even the government, and focus mainly on demonstrative activities aligned with actions for improving the enabling conditions for bioenergy upscaling investment, right? So there's a lot has been said about the challenges, but I think in project development and implementation, like the challenges are mainly threefold on regulatory and legal, right? So as mentioned before, the absence of a long-term regulatory and legal frameworks, grid regulation interconnection, bioenergy, a lack of integration of bioenergy incentives and policies into existing climate renewable energy regulatory frameworks, and so on, regulation for digistate, and also I would say a second challenge area is also technical and operational, right? Related to technical standards, the availability of biogas equipment, as some of the previous panelists mentioned, limited experience with biogas, and also the financial. So the three barriers are mainly this: regulatory and legal, the technical and operational, and then financial, of course, with the high capex, right, which lead many of those projects to reduce the scope of the pilots and demonstrative actions. Also the lack of incentives for biogas generation and upgrading, and which generates difficulties for developers to include the financial support, right, for these measures. So definitely, I think about the challenges that has been mentioned before, but these are actually the elements that are needed, this balance in between financial, technical and operation, and regulatory and legal instruments, right, to give the certainty and security and direction for investors in the market. So those projects mainly work into two streams of action, right? To support governments and the private sector to work with specific local sector challenges at the upstream and the downstream level. So I wanted to bring a couple of examples of this work at the upstream, general examples at the work at this upstream and downstream, and then little examples. So at the upstream is really connected to the regulatory aspect, which is actually related to facilitate more coherence and coordination among the different political areas related to biogas and bioenergy production. So the bioenergy field is really like transsectorial and multi-level. So I think those kind of projects play a very important role in bringing this discussion and between the different political stakeholders and technical stakeholders at the national level. So these projects can also support the as a technical assistance, right? Assessments and studies to characterize market and resource availability. It also supports this clear policy and from environmental authorities, like connecting, for example, solid waste regulations with energy, any generation laws. And also, I think one important element of those projects are also the opportunities to improve some of the administrative processes, right, within the governments. It's a kind of experimenting and in practical, the applicability of these procurement processes and call for projects can be a very interesting learning curve for governments. And of course, the systematization and dissemination of information, right? Sometimes we know that this information or even the regulatory and legal arrangements are there, but this information is scattered, and these projects play an important role in supporting this consolidation or management of this information. Well, more at the downstream level, which we consider like at the project, the piloting level, those projects also generate financial and project structuring capacities in developers in the different areas, right? Private sector, which are participating on these bids, and also the government, as mentioned before, it also strengthens like the knowledge and tools for evaluation of biogas, promote awareness, and the links with circular economy, green business, bioeconomy. I think to bring in those projects into the circular economy, like a more clear link on also the economic opportunities are necessary. And also, I think in overall generating more system efficiency. And with this one, I wanted to finalize just mentioning an example from a project called Sucre, which Professor Ort was also involved in Brazil, and which aimed at actually looking at evaluating the feasibility of optimizing trash use. Well, in this case, straw beyond bagasse, you know, at 8 additional on 8 mills on the sugarcane sector, production sector in Brazil. So the project actually facilitated very many important field experiments, right, to share results from project supported trash collection in processing systems. So the project really opened up this space for experimenting with a lot of technical assistance from laboratories and specialized institutions there, and in the end contributed to increase the grid exports from sugarcane mills by increasing the sugarcane powered electricity exports by 30%. So yeah, so the Sucre project also proposed some policy reforms and incentives to sugarcane electricity exports, and also, of course, promoted this knowledge generation in this case, right, with the specific experimentation. Well, the project in the end invested more than $120 million in equipment to optimize. So the initial grants that the project offered to the market leveraged a lot of investments and new processes for producing and generating industry electricity from the industry, and increased very much the output from the participating mills. So stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lumila. Very interesting to hear about the activities that you're doing both upstream and downstream, and definitely very relevant in terms of attempts of addressing those challenges. And I think you partially addressed my next question, which would have been on supporting the pipeline of bankable bioenergy projects. But perhaps you would like to add something there on what you see as the role of development partners generally on really supporting the pipeline or enabling replicability and market development. Thank you.
Sorry. Yes, sure. So besides this, these opportunities to really pilot initiatives, right? I think so developing partners can really support, as was mentioned before, this energy and this interconnection of energy, environmental policies and regulations to provide this framework for biogas development, as these will be like key support to support the pipeline of bankable bioenergy projects, right? So there's a strong regulatory frameworks will actually contribute to more like financial sustainability of projects, so we can put that into this aside, right? So basically what we have been experiencing at the regional and global level, it's like is the references to include bioenergy targets into renewable energy policies. It's like minimize the permitting processes timeline. This is our ways of kind of de-risking, right, the investments or reducing the time for completeness or approval of projects. So in this sense, also streamlining the process for the project developer, right? I think we should look into much more, with much more attention into what can be digitalized in this processes of permits from the government and grid access and environment impact assessment, how those can be more streamlined with digital tools. And of course, I think one very important element is to consider stakeholders involved in the market and bringing stakeholder engagement and participation, right, and into these processes. So in parallel, of course, to this political framework, I think developing partners can facilitate these feasibility studies and, as I mentioned before, and also discuss how to identify climate finance that is already available at the multilateral, bilateral sphere or sector, but also nationally, right, to develop support schemes that stimulate bioenergy market development and guarantee this long-term investment security, right? I think experimenting into other contract modalities can be very relevant. I saw about this three-parted example that is being applicable. So this is something about changing the way partners partner together to develop those projects, right? But also, of course, ensuring that it's not over-subsidized into the long term. So, as I said, inclusion of other kinds of financial instruments, such as grants that can be then integrated with tax exemptions and loan guarantees are also ways to facilitate the increase of or a stronger pipeline of projects, right? And also fiscal incentives for agriculture cooperatives, that as much of this energy will come from there. I think just to close up, and then maybe I can come with other example later if necessary. I think developing partners also should play an important role here in bringing this discussion about equity and inclusion, right, in these projects. And it's still around the developing world, women play a very central role in producing bioenergy, right? Biomass is also used by the poor for other proposed purposes. So I think to bring this element in general in the development of the project pipeline, in this more upstream regulatory and legal arrangements that are needed to create the enabling conditions for bioenergy investments are a key role for the developing partners. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really interesting, particularly very interesting to hear about streamlining the process for developers and also identifying and tapping into climate finance schemes. Also, thank you for mentioning the other socioeconomic benefits linked to tapping into these local and low carbon energy sources. Thanks. In order to keep on to time, I'll now move to the next panelist, but hopefully we'll be able to come back with a final question at the end. So now I'd like to invite Alejandro Miranda from CAF. Thank you for joining us today to share your perspectives. As a multilateral development bank, you have both an important role in financing climate action and development, but also in addressing transboundary challenges and sharing lessons learned across client countries. So my first question to you is, what is the role of multilateral financial development institutions in supporting the development and implementation of bioenergy projects? And what do you think are the main challenges for bioenergy to access commercial finance? Thank you.
Hola Lila, ¿qué tal? Muy buenos días a todos.
Hello, Laila. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure being here in this webinar. I think what you're mentioning is really important. The Multilateral Development Bank wants to provide access to funding to implement projects. Let's not forget that our mandate goes beyond providing that funding. Since we are a development bank, we aim to eliminate the market gaps and creating enabling conditions for different projects can be implemented. And not only in the bioenergy projects, we have different instruments and different actions that we can work on. So as I said, the multilateral commercial bank can manage and can better manage the risks better than the commercial banks. And we not only focused on the investment economic return, we need to see what our main tools. Basically, we have two main categories. We have a category that are instruments to support investment and another category of instruments to support a specific investment for the projects. So for pre-investment, we have tools to provide non-refundable technical assistance to develop the regulatory frameworks. We have tools to support the strengthening of capabilities, and even we have tools to start piloting or implemented projects that can be demonstrative of certain technology. And now with the elements that we have for specific funding of projects, well, since we are a bank, we have the common instruments of a bank like warranty schemes, credit systems, equities, investments or donations. And in the case of the CAF, we are accredited agencies by the three main development banks, or the three main green funds, the green funds, the adaptation fund, and the World Environmental Fund. And since we are an accredited institutions, we can leverage resources or even donations in order to implement or create these enabling frameworks and eliminate the barriers. So from the challenges point of view to access funding for for these bioenergy projects? Well, I think I would agree with the previous panelists. One of the main challenges is on the regulatory framework. Regionally, we still need to adjust or strengthen these regulatory frameworks so they can keep providing incentives for bioenergy. I had a great opportunity to keep working and keep developing these regulatory frameworks to eliminate these barriers. And another a challenge that we have is the risk perception. There's a high risk perception in bioenergy projects. To put an example, when we do the due diligence for the funding of a project, we normally assess the whole implementation chain for that project. And we make sure that from the beginning, the project can assure of the fuel supply and also on the technology in a second stage, and on a third stage, the regulatory framework and the contracts to be able to sell the product that is being generated. So for bioenergy projects, the two main areas where we have opportunities for biomass supply, well, we work regionally with some projects, and a big opportunity that we identified is that many times they didn't have a specific contracts to regularly supply with a biomass. So since they don't have that access, the energy generation was at risk, and also the repayment of the debt. So this is an area where we need to still keep working to find legal or regulatory frameworks that make sure that the biomass supply is constant. And also Manuel Ron mentioned that when we assess a credit operation, it should have at least some type of a contract for the purchase of energy. It could be PPAs or bilateral contracts or a contract with the regulatory entity. We need that in order to assess profitability, these projects needs to have these legal instruments to do all the cash flow analysis and to assess the risk. And in the region, we still have some countries where this is not regulated, so there's more opportunities to keep working.
Thank you, Alejandro. Lots of really interesting points there, particularly on the capacity building, but also on some of the instruments. Yeah, so particularly on capacity building, I think that's a really important point, which a number of interventions have picked up on. So it's interesting to hear about that. And agreed on the challenges around risks and perceptions for regulatory frameworks. I think this is the need for a power purchase agreement is very important in a number of banks we spoke to have this evaluation of risk and return. So moving on to my next point, I would like to ask you about how to support more commercial finance. So from your perspective, what kind of instruments can be used to try and crowd in more private, more commercial finance? So what are the types of financing models or blended finance arrangements which can best support bioenergy markets?
Claro. Básicamente para analizar una operación de crédito desde el punto de
Basically, to assess a credit operation, we have two main instruments. One is the corporate level funding, and the other one is the funding through special purpose vehicles. So from the risk assessment point of view, funding through corporate credits is less risky than funding a specific project, because what we assess is the financial capability of the project developers, and we have less requirements from the legal and economical point of view. And the other way is the SPV. Through the SPV, what we assess is the flow per se, in the revenue and expenses, and through these flows, we determine if the project is technically and economically viable. So to be able to increase a higher flow towards the access of funding in bioenergy projects, we need to try to design specific models in order to implement and develop this type of projects. To put an example, there are some projects that with a small investment or with a reduction of the funding rate, this may make the projects economically viable. Sometimes the rate may not be a critical factor, but also the term, the deadline for the return of the investment. So we need to create an initiative or a regional program so we can pre-identify what are the market barriers that are limiting the implementation of this type of project. And we can design a project or a program suitable to that type of barriers. That way we can implement these instruments. And as I was saying, we have instruments for the pre-investment stage and also for the investment stage. And what we need is to determine in which cases we're going to need certain elements or instruments in order to create this access to funding.
Thank you, Alejandro. Good to hear also around the different stages and different instruments that are suitable, and the need for regional programs. I think these are both very good points, and your intervention is much appreciated here. In the name of time, I'm going to move on to the next panelist. So I'd like to now invite Arturo Milanes from the BNDES. Thank you very much for joining us today. I understand BNDES has had a pivotal role in the bioenergy market in Brazil, helping it evolve and mature over the last couple of decades. So I would like to address my first question on what, if you could tell us a bit more about the role of BNDES in supporting innovation and helping the bioenergy market mature and really change over this period. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Laila, for the invitation and giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about the BNDES agenda for the biofuels industry. Thank you for the question. BNDES's strategy for biofuel sector has been changed all over the years. We could say that by the beginning of the 2000, the priority was to support the growth of the sector. So we were able to fund a big part of the cycle of investment that we had from 2005 until 2010-11. And after that, our priority became the innovation development. So we supported a different kind of development in the past, such as the second generation ethanol, biogas and biomethane, new varieties of sugarcane, and another technologies such as IoT. So those new technological packages, they are coming to market now. So we are seeing the development second gen ethanol. We are seeing the spread of biogas very, very fast. We saw the first transgenic varieties of sugarcane. And now practically all the sugarcane fields in Brazil are on IoT, are using IoT for machinery, for equipment. So if you combine all these new technologies, you're seeing a very huge impact on productivity. So this is now the main concern of the bank, to help the sector to adopt those new technologies that are now available. And for the future, we are now focusing on the new biofuels and new forms of use of biofuels. So we are helping the development of green diesel and sustainable aviation fuels and hydrogen, for example. We see an opportunity to develop new platforms such as the self-fuel based on green hydrogen that can, and this hydrogen can be used from or can be obtained from ethanol or from biogas. So it's alternative electrification routes. We are used to think electrification only for using batteries, but we can foster other forms of electrifications, such as the use of ethanol and hydrogen. And we see that those technologies can enable the faster decarbonization of the transport sector. And it's even important, I think, for countries in Latin America that maybe lack of the infrastructure or the resources necessary to really change the infrastructure for recharging, that maybe the richer countries can develop it faster. Maybe for Latin America should also see other ways to electrify the transport sector. So those are the technologies that we are now trying to foster here in Brazil.
Thanks, Yasu. It's interesting to hear the dual focus on productivity, but also on innovation to support decarbonization goals in your work with bioenergy, and particularly the link with hydrogen. So I also understand that BNDES is active in the region, so beyond just your work in Brazil, and it would be quite interesting to hear how you, but also other national development banks can have this broader reach, and what type of financing instruments are being used.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, we are mainly focused on Brazil. We have a different kinds of instruments that you can fund investments in Brazil. We can fund the equipment acquisition, we can fund the crop investments, different sort of instrument for different sort of goals. But we can also fund investments overseas, since it's linked, the project is linked to an exportation of Brazilian equipment or service. We can use BNDES instrument to fund that. So since Brazil is a major manufacturer of equipment and other services that are needed for different kind of factors of biofuels, we can, of course, if it's in this interest of the investor, we can use BNDES funding to support that. Yes.
Thank you very much, Oscar. I know we're running behind schedule, so I'm going to move on to Gerard. So thank you for joining us, Gerard, and telling us about the work of the BioFuture campaign. I understand your work is quite closely linked to industry to accelerate deployment of bio and waste-based products. So I'll be interested to hear how how international partnerships and cooperation is so important for private investment in the bioenergy sector.
Sure, a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to join. Hello, Artur. It's been a little while. Yeah, so I would like to step back and make a point that I don't think has been made quite yet. Is we can get a lot of inspiration from different countries, different regions, and different industries. And if we actually look at the renewable power industry, so wind and solar, those two sectors are justifiably very proud right now. They've had a lot of success. But one of the biggest, and everybody points to the fact that their cost curve has come down. And what I think one of the things that really made that possible was that there was a power purchase agreement, right? And so the stability of price can enable investment, right? And so that price, so we've used the terms, many people have said this in many different ways during this webinar. We've talked about policy incentives, policy stability. At the end of the day, what it comes down to is actually setting a basement price and setting up mechanisms whereby the product that we get from the biomass, whether it is a fuel, whether it's power, whether it's a chemical, that we can ensure that we get that price. And then there we run into the challenge of the price of bio-based products. At least now, we're pretty high up on the cost curve. We need to come down the cost curve, but we are making progress. And if we look at some fuels like ethanol, those have come down the cost curve, because what happened is Brazil and America set a price, and it was a price where the farmers could make money, and it was a price where the producers could make money. And so we in the Clean Energy Ministerial BioFuture platform, we are a collection of countries and leading organizations like GBEP and IRENA. So we heard from Jinlei earlier, we heard from Michaela earlier. They are our partners. Our leading countries are Brazil, Canada, India, Netherlands, and the United States. And within the Clean Energy Ministerial, if you have an initiative, then you are expected to partner with the private sector. So I manage the private sector engagement along with the International Energy Agency, and we call that private sector engagement the BioFuture campaign, right? And so in that campaign, we have about a dozen industry organizations and more than 30 individual companies that range the entire spectrum from renewable natural gas producers all the way to sustainable aviation fuel producers, chemical producers, et cetera. And so one of the challenges in this sector, one of the things we're going to think about is how best to use biomass. The other thing that I think that came through strongly in the conversation today is that biomass has different types of application. We have a lot, I think in Latin America, there's a lot of opportunity for local, highly functional, highly industry-specific applications. These are some of the best applications. So using biomass directly for heat and power in an industrial setting can drive sustainable development, can reduce costs, and can be an effective source of renewable energy to meet all sorts of sustainable development goals for a specific industrial application in a specific spot, usually in a rural area. and I put biogas in that, I put waste to power in that, and I put biomass to power in that. Those are all very important. A lot of times we don't hear about them in the international community because they're funded off the balance sheet. So this company just decides, do we need a boiler? Okay, we'll put in a boiler. And then they look around and then biomass is competitive, so they use biomass. Sometimes it is necessary to get some government investment in order to drive those smaller industrial applications. On the flip side, and this is where we need the economic support, is when we're talking about these, you could say these broader applications where we're going to convert entire sections of land, entire sections of the economy to produce fuels, chemicals, and materials. That's a longer conversation. There's enormous capex cost up front, which creates a barrier. And then there's subsequently the OPEX, and I think other people have talked very well about the essential need to de-risk feedstock. You know, if we look at the primary barriers, there's technology risk and there's feedstock risk. And I'll just finish by saying, you know, I think people have talked about this, but we in the BioFuture community, we want to de-risk investment. And the way that we want to do that is we want to build investor confidence in the feedstock, that it's sustainable, that it helps with climate goals, and then it can help industry move forward. Sorry, one more point, last point. So the last point is actually, if we look at the big drivers these days, a lot of the driving, you know, especially if anybody here has been to COP, you just see how aggressive companies are about meeting their own corporate decarbonization commitments. And so we have this situation where it's really crazy out there, frankly. You know, it's not the steady policy that led to the renewable fuel standard in the United States, that led to the Brazilian situation, that led to the California low carbon fuels standard. It's not the situation that we have in Canada. It's really crazy where you have companies that are competing with each other to decarbonize. And so we have this weird Wild West situation of voluntary carbon markets, offsets, people like companies promising that they're going to decarbonize under tremendous pressure to decarbonize. And so we have to be really careful about how we do that accounting, how we make sure that projects aren't double counted. And we have to think very deeply about maybe bringing some order to the chaos. And I have more to say about that, but thank you very much. I know it's getting late.
Thank you for a number of very, very interesting points there. I think your first point, particularly on stability of price can enable investment, is a very crucial one that throughout, as we've seen throughout the different presentations. And this really highlights the value of being able to bring to light these investments. So we can talk about big investments, but these much smaller ones which are happening based on balance sheet, which are not being seen. So I'm going to direct one more question to you, and then I might have to wrap up this panel. But my last question would be to where do you see really some of the key priorities that are needed to strengthen the business environment for bioenergy projects, specifically in LAC? And I'm asking you this question bearing given your wide perspective across different regions.
Right. So I do think that, as I indicated earlier, that we can learn a lot of lessons and bring them to LAC. And then similarly, there's good lessons that we can take to the LAC area and take to other places. And this is really what the BioFuture platform should be accomplishing. We should be a vehicle for moving these lessons and sharing this information. And so look to us, look to the BioFuture platform to create some resources, both for LAC and for South Asia around the essential aspects of de-risking biomass through building confidence in sustainability and building confidence in the availability of the biomass. And so we're working very hard on that. And something that I will spotlight is that, so this year, the G20 and the Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation they're all meeting in India this year in 2023 next year. But the year after that, we're all coming to Brazil. And so there's a very exciting opportunity in 2024 to focus the world's attention on clean energy in the LAC region, and then to bring this to the attention of heads of state at the G20 in 2024. Unfortunately, it's a year and a half away, so we have time to actually get some stuff done. So I am very happy moving forward to work with the LEDS-LAC project and to reconnect with some of my friends and colleagues in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we've been a bit squeezed for this session, but really, really good points raised across the panel. And we've benefited from such a diversity of opinions, of experiences as well, which really enriches the insights from this panel that we've had right now. So a very big thank you to you, and thank you for sharing these insights. So unfortunately, this brings this panel on finance and investment to a close, and I'll now hand over to my colleagues, Der Saigen and also Ada Lorenzo, to provide closing comments and discussion on next steps. Once again, thank you to everyone on this panel.
Yeah. Are you starting? Technically, you're supposed to start.
No, I think Daniela first.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos los invitados. La verdad que
Thank you very much to all the panelists. We've had very interesting panels to know the perspective from the financial sector. There has been very good arguments. We've seen how important is the investment, and we need to be clear, where does the feedstock come from? This is one of the key aspects on bioenergy projects, and something really important is to understand what's this process for the technology that we're going to use. It's been mentioned that this is not only about electrical energy, this is about energy in general, and this is also about climate change. As Gerard said, we see that everything or everyone is looking to decarbonize. So it's important to see this. A small presentation. I know we are behind on a schedule. So as we said, we are a community of practice from LEDS-LAC. We have 6 years of activity. We have 53 members, and I hope more can join. We need more partners to learn from. We have 15 countries of Latin America. So we need all the support that we can get. Everyone has a different input. We are a network where we have peer learning sessions. Today we've learned from other projects that the bioenergy sector is really wide, and there are several ways to apply this technology. The idea is to have several groups, and these are the next steps. We have a challenge for bioenergy projects. We want to launch this. Well, we need more partners, but we are planning to launch on the second quarter of 2023. We're going to have 2 categories. The first one, the projects on the first stages. Many times we have a project that need adjustments, and in the end, we're going to determine the technology and the procedures. And we also have some mature projects. These have a pre-feasibility study, but it needs to be polished. So we're gonna have pre-selected projects, and the winners are gonna have a training session to strengthen their proposals. And when we selected the final projects, we're gonna have a presentation before a panel of experts and funders. They're gonna say what the projects need to be funded and in order to for them to become a reality. And the winning projects are going to receive technical assistance and contact with financial institutions. It's really important to pair someone with a good idea and somebody with the funds. So we want to provide liaisons, and this could be a huge prize for these institutions that want to work on this. To become a part of the community, this is free. We are open to everyone. Astrid, can you please share the link to access the Google form? This is completely free, and in the end, we are going to be able to share our own experiences from each country. This is the link for the WhatsApp group. Here we can share ideas and share what we are doing. And you can also follow us on social media. Here we have the GCAP social accounts. We have also the OECD social accounts, and you can also follow us LEDS-LAC. Like Cecilia said, this session is going to be published on the LEDS-LAC website. It's also going to be published in the OECD and in RL. So thank you again for your participation. I don't know if somebody else from the team wants to say a few words, or we can close now.
Vamos a tener unos comentarios por parte de OECD
We're going to have some comments from the OECD. Okay, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much to the presenters, to Laila and to Dominique for their organization of this event, together with, of course, Daniela, Maida Lorenzo, and Aida Figari. And once more, thanks to all presenters and the discussants, as we are heading for the second round of this discussion early next year in a second workshop. Before we advance on that, I'd like to provide a very brief summary of today's discussion, which we had across 3 sessions. I think what we heard today was, and we all knew, that the Latin American, the Caribbean region is well advanced with respect to bioenergy use, representing a very large share of the total renewable energy demand. And the success factors for advancing further while ensuring the sustainable supply of biomass and its use, planning, design, accounting for the benefits, and in particular for the several policy pillars, the sustainability for target setting, cross-sector coordination for biomass use, certification, and integration with the broader sustainable development goals are key. We've discussed a number of barriers today, paid particular attention to the investment barriers. But first of all, we need to, I think, repeat once more that these barriers are country-specific, yet there are some commonalities. The supply chain weaknesses have been mentioned with respect to environmental, social, and economic aspects, the need for capacity building. Some speakers mentioned the lack of incentives, the overall capital cost, the need for creating local demand markets, especially with legislation and mandate support, the need for logistics to be economical, the need for business case overall, the importance of structuring financial models for bankable projects, crediting carbon emission reductions, accounting for the full product output and benefits of projects, because it's a cross-sectoral, multi-product technology, what we talk about, were some of the barriers some speakers have mentioned. During session 2, I must say we've heard very interesting case studies and experiences from various successful projects that are ongoing. The circularity of biomass has been highlighted. I think this is important to realize, especially the cascading uses of biomass, which improves the efficiency across the value chain, is key. At the end of the day, this is a multi-product technology. And for that, we've heard from these different real-life projects, the different modalities of forming companies, development partnerships, especially public-private sector partnerships, are key to support financing and de-risking, and especially to ensure robustness to the project in the start of the development of projects. Engineering and better design for de-risking have also been found helpful in some examples. We've heard about the role of multi-development banks to help better manage the risks and create access to financing, especially because biomass is still seen in certain circumstances a high-risk project, yet the cost competitiveness, as was mentioned by some speakers, have improved significantly over the past years, and therefore funding by balance sheet is becoming increasingly more. However, we still need to understand how to de-risk projects on both on the pre-investment side with technical assistance and other tools, but also during the project facilitation and operation. And we've also heard about the importance of creating enabling conditions and tapping into climate finance, streamlining processes with project developers, and as a final point, stakeholder engagement in design of projects and running projects have been mentioned several times. These are my notes from today's very detailed discussion. If I may have missed anything, if there's anything which the speakers want to add, of course, we are very much welcomed. But again, thank you very much, and look forward to meeting again with this audience and even more at the beginning of 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your participation in today's webinar. We really enjoyed all of your commentary, all of your presentations, and we very much look forward to continuing the discussions with you, hopefully in phase 2. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias a todos. Daniela, me uno al agradecimiento.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Thank you to the whole team that made this possible, especially OECD and the community. As always, the Bioenergy community of practice is always here in case you need our support, and we will be informing you about this challenge that we want to launch next year, and hopefully you can share this with other people so Bioenergy can keep growing in our countries. So have a nice day, a nice afternoon, and I hope we see each other very soon. Goodbye.